We're joined by Stephen Reimer. He's a senior research fellow at the Center for Financial Crime and Security Studies at the Royal United Services Institute.
Mr. Reimer, thank you for joining us. First off, how Hamas has been funded has drawn a lot of scrutiny, and certainly a lot more since the attacks of October the 7th. I mean, we do know that Israel itself has helped to finance, to prop up Hamas for some time now, but the manner in which those attacks occurred would suggest considerable funding. Put it into context for us, if you will, the sophistication of the financing network that Hamas has had to hand.
Thanks for having me. Well, obviously, there are various means in which Hamas has been able to raise funds over a sustained period of time. You mentioned three of the most important ones already. First of all, donation campaigns. And what we've seen a lot of recently has been a real overblowing of the cryptocurrency issue, whereby it's been reported that massive amounts of donations have been made to Hamas through cryptocurrencies. Some estimates in the media have put that figure at around $90 million, but folks in the cryptocurrency industry itself might lower that to about $450,000. So we have really wildly varying estimates of how much money is being raised through crypto, but whether or not it's in cryptocurrency or different means, it's really the taxation and extortion of everyday economic activity in Gaza that has allowed for Hamas to raise, probably one of the largest shares of its funds. And this is taxing and extorting everyday economic activity, as well as goods coming over the border, with everything from cement to cigarettes. And the investment portfolio that Hamas has been able to generate and maintain over the years is really what I think the current situation is bringing us into closer focus on. The U.S. Department of Treasury's sanctions against financial facilitators in countries such as Algeria, Sudan, and Turkey have pointed out how this financial facilitation network is vast, it's highly sophisticated, and it's really what's allowed Hamas to build a war chest that will probably last beyond the current conflict.
Mr. Reimer, given, as you say, one big source of funding is from daily economic activities, when Treasury Secretary in the U.S., Janet Yellen, says there will be swift and decisive action to target Hamas's financiers and facilitators, do you think this action can actually be effective?
Well, I think this has a lot to do with where we need to place our focus nowadays. There's been plenty of discussion about competing priorities between delivering humanitarian aid to Gaza, which is absolutely essential, and concerns about humanitarian aid as well as funds being siphoned off in aid of Hamas, and particularly its military wing, the Al-Qassam brigades. But when it comes to targeting that investment portfolio, we're looking at jurisdictions and stores of funds that are far from the conflict zone. There was a really interesting article recently in the London newspaper, The Telegraph, which looked at some of the housing developments in Turkey that have been developed by U.S. designated development companies, one of many companies that are part of Hamas's very wide-ranging financial facilitation network. So I think the current conflict is hopefully going to shift our focus towards focusing on these financial facilitation networks, getting more countries on board, and decreasing the tolerance that some countries have to allowing this activity to occur on their soil.
That financial facilitation that you mentioned there, Mr. Reimer, I want to bring your attention to the October 19th resolution by the EU Parliament, which called for humanitarian assistance to be stepped up for the Palestinians, but also urged the Commission to, and I'm quoting here, to initiate a thorough review of all EU financial assistance to Palestine and the region in order to ensure that no EU funds directly or indirectly financed any terrorist organization. And that's a curious sort of wording of that particular resolution. What does it tell us about the possibility or the fear of the abuse of the abuse of aid funds?
Look, I mean, this European Parliament declaration really shows us how we're in a sticky situation when it comes to dealing with the financing of terrorist groups that control territory. Humanitarian aid that goes to Gaza, that must continue to go to Gaza, it will be taxed by Hamas's military wing. Some of those funds will eventually end up supporting the military wing of Hamas. But we have to stand by the decision that we've decided is acceptable, that some of this diversion of humanitarian aid and of funds is tolerable, because the alternative to not allow for humanitarian aid to move into the Strip leaves us in no better position, whereby civilians are left to suffer and to really be in a very, very bad situation, which is only going to push them further into the warm embrace of extremist groups such as Hamas.
You talk about competing priorities, Mr. Reimer. There's the immediate situation, humanitarian situation, and over the next few months and possibly years in the Gaza Strip as well. If we talk about competing priorities, what are they right now? What should they be later on to ensure that there is funding, taking into account some might be siphoned off?
I think we're in a situation where we have to accept that some of these funds will go towards Hamas. But the situation on the ground at the moment and the current actions being taken by the Israel Defense Forces suggests that Hamas's main source of financing and revenue, which is its control of the Gaza Strip territory, might be coming to an end quite soon, or at the very least, their control over that territory will be severely reduced. This will have two impacts. The first is it will reduce Hamas's ability to raise funds, but it's also going to crucially reduce its overhead expenses. Hamas's budget has large expenses dedicated to providing social services. And if Hamas is no longer the de facto authority in that territory, they're going to have far fewer costs to meet. So we could see a transition of Hamas into a group such as Islamic State, where something very similar happened after its territorial holdings in Iraq and Syria were severely diminished. Its costs decreased, but so were its ways of generating revenue, forcing that group to become more of a guerrilla-type organization. We could see something similar happening with Hamas.
Mr. Reimer, as far as state support is concerned, Qatar is way up there as well for Hamas. I mean, if that were to happen, if Hamas were to lose territorial sort of control, and from what we're seeing, there's a very big possibility that that may well happen in the days or months, maybe years to come. What do you see as the potential for the diversification of Hamas in terms of the investments that it makes going forward?
I mean, the first thing I want to say about state sponsorship of Hamas is that really Iran is and always has been Hamas's main country backer. That support for Hamas has ebbed and flowed over time. Occasionally, fewer funds are allocated to Hamas because of sanctions on Iran, I mean there's less money they can send to their supporters. So really, this story is a story about Iran. But to speak about Qatar briefly, I think it's important that we set the record straight about what's happening with Qatar. Yes, we do know that Qatar has been using some funds to pay for the salaries of Hamas administrators, so crucially members of the social services wing of the organization, as a means of easing economic pressure in the Gaza Strip that could have boiled over. And I think it's really crucial that we clarify that these funds, in coordination with the UN, with the United States, and with Israel, were to support the social services wing of Hamas. These are not funds destined for the Al-Qassam brigades or the military wing. Most of those funds ended up in the hands of needy families. But really, we have to expect that some is siphoned off.
Mr. Reimer, thank you for your insights. Mr. Stephen Reimer, their Senior Research Fellow at the Centre for Financial Crime and Security Studies at the Royal United Services Institute. Thank you.